So let us, so a minute or two, anyone, so here's a question someone put up here, I think from Boon Kang. Hi, Boon. Can I call you Boon or I have to say Boon Kang? Either. Okay. So his question is there a difference between affirming negation and a non-affirming negation? Give examples! Exclamation mark. So, yeah, non-affirming negation is what we were mentioning earlier, like emptiness and selflessness, or say, for instance, the non-existence of an elephant in this room. It didn't imply or affirm that there was a horse or a cow or anything else, right? If you say that this self, it does not inherently exist, it does not imply or affirm any other kind of self. It's just negating that one particular thing. Also, like space, which is defined as the non-existence of any hindrance or obstruction, the lack of obstructing contact. It doesn't affirm anything else in its place. But if you were to say, the very famous one that also comes up in the text in another context, if you were to say, the fat Devadatta, using Devadatta, you know, the famous cousin of the Buddha, who was the naughty one in the life of the Buddha, just using him as a generic name. So the fat Devadatta who does not eat at night. So that's a negation, because you're negating eating at night, but you're implicitly affirming, because if he's fat, it's got to be eating, right? So if he doesn't eat at night, he has to be eating during the day. That's kind of one example, but there are many other examples, affirming negations. The way that the statement is phrased, or what you're trying to imply, and so forth. Okay, we'll come back to that Bunkan. So let's begin, as we have been, with some meditation. Try to set a good motivation. Sit comfortably, relax your body. Relax your mind. When I say that, of course, all of the watching of the breathing and the mind and so forth are helping to relax the mind in the sense of letting go of all of the busy thoughts. But simply, at the beginning, just making a strong determination, a resolution. I don't have to think about anything else right now. This is going to be my meditation session for deep healing. And begin to observe the respiration as we've been doing, without controlling, with a wisdom factor that recognizes when the movement of the breath is in and when it's out, and watching those endpoints when it changes direction. course, there's a big difference when you've lost the breathing. You're no longer observing it, and you're just thinking some other thoughts. But there's a noticeable difference between when part of your mind is following some thoughts and only part of it's watching the breathing. There's a difference between that and when you invest more of your attention in watching the thoughts. Or watching the breathing, rather. Watching the breathing. Then follow one breath when you inhale up to the crown of your head, through your throat to the middle of your chest. Leave your attention there. And watch the mind with one part of the mind. You're ideally going to be trying to observe the spaciousness around the thoughts, where the thoughts are, where the distorted states of mind. Like looking at the fish in the Singapore and Sentosa Island, looking at the fish in the aquarium. Fish-like thoughts, the water like the clarity of the mind. Don't get involved with what your eyes are seeing, the visual field. If things get too black, you can just slightly open your eyes a little bit, let some light in. Use a logical reason such as this. For these thoughts to be in the mind, or even if the mind is somewhat calm right now, for them to have been in the mind has to be unobstructing, like the definition of space. It doesn't obstruct the coming and going of thoughts. It's immaterial. It knows. here what it's knowing when you're trying to watch the nature of the mind is this factor of clarity, which in a sense, as though the mind were a mirror, clear mirror that has been shined, cleaned with a cloth, a good microfiber cloth, so no fingerprints, no dust on it. Whatever is placed in front of that mirror is reflected in it without effort. So whatever is placed, in a sense, before the mind or presents itself to the mind appears clearly within the mind. There are moments of awareness. There's a continuity of consciousness. See if you can try to develop a mental image of this clarity of the mind. And hold on to that. If your mind gets distracted to your body, remind yourself that the body is appearing to your mental consciousness just like these thoughts. It's arising within the clarity of the mind, and it could not arise unless there was spaciousness and clarity there, the factor of knowing there. So again and again, take your attention away from that sense of the body that may be, so seemingly looming, presenting itself there, to defocus on that and refocus on the consciousness to which that is appearing. Look at the subjective mind rather than the objective thought or the objective image in your mind. And even the sense of a self that's observing the mind, that is an appearance to the mind. In reality, there is no separate self appearing like that exists the way that it appears. Here you won't have an apprehension of emptiness or selflessness by letting go of that, but simply recognizing that you don't have to follow that appearance. It's just an appearance to the mind, and you refocus on the subjective mind that's knowing it. Which have these factors of being immaterial, clarity like a mirror, clarity in the sense of non-obstructing, and also the factor of knowing. can think, wow, this is my incredible possession right now, in the sense that I can apprehend it and understand it as a human being while I have this life of leisure and endowment. And I can recognize that within this mind, this conventional Buddha nature, so to speak, I can develop good qualities. I can eliminate the faults of my mind, self-interest exclusively for myself, ignoring others, harmful minds. I can develop in their place good minds, like reformatting a hard drive, erasing all the bad ones and reformatting it with a new operating system, Bodhisattva operating system. This can be done. This is what the great beings have done. What Shakyamuni Buddha over many, many lifetimes did. So to think, I'm going to start that endeavor today, and to make a first step, I'm going to listen to the teachings about the mind and awareness, the ways of knowing, to get familiar with this mind, with my goal being to eventually achieve enlightenment, follow the path that the Buddha followed for the sake of living beings, all sentient beings. The fish and turtles and frogs that some of you liberated today, or other insects or clams, all the beings in the various realms, the hell realms, the Preta beings, the animal beings, humans in other universes, God realms, the desire realm, the form realm, sentient beings, formless realm. This big family is though sitting down here, imagining them all and deciding to work for their welfare. That's why I'm going to be listening to the teachings this evening. And then relax. Bring your attention back to the present, the here and now. Does anyone have any question about meditation, about the meditation we were doing? It's all clear, right? No doubts? I'm not sure if it's good or bad. Yes? And I can't hear you, so Wee Chin, I can remember, he has a small chin, just a wee chin. It's going to ring.
Thank you. Okay, my question is probably really dumb, but when you said to look at objects like a mirror, like to see the objects as if it was a very clear mirror, does that include thoughts? Does that include thoughts?
Does that include thoughts?
The objects.
So the objects, say the objects that you put before a mirror are different, a different nature than the mirror, but they're reflected in the mirror, right? So whatever your mind turns itself to, it might be thinking about, my cough drop or the bus or whatever, that presents itself to the mind, and it appears clearly within the mind in the same way that an object placed before a mirror appears clearly in the mind, clearly in the mirror. There's no need for the mirror to put some effort into, come here, stay in me, it's automatic. So that gives you it's again an analogy. It's not a one-to-one correspondence, but it gives you another way of looking at the mind. So what we're trying to do is develop an intellectual understanding of the mental consciousness of mind in general as this entity. The main definition is that mind is that which is clear and knowing. And the meaning of clear has many levels of subtlety. But on the levels that we were talking about, being immaterial, being clear in the sense that it, like a clear mirror, it effortlessly allows the appearance within it of any object that presents itself to the mind. It is not like molasses that hinders the escape of a little fly that's gone into the molasses, So if a thought is in the mind, it's not as though it can't escape. There's no impediment to it like that. Okay? Does that help? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
There you go. Anyone else encouraged to ask a question? Again? So what's the analogy for knowing? So, so there's not an analogy, as far as I know, for instance, if you talk about a crystal, a clear crystal paperweight that you put on top of a book, and then you can see the cover of the book through the crystal, or if you put it on a blue or yellow cloth, you can see that color through the crystal. So that paperweight, that crystal is clear, not the same clarity as the mind, but that's one of the aspects, the fact that it's transparent and so forth, that it allows things to appear within it. But the crystal doesn't have the faculty of knowing. And it's said that the faculty of knowing is something that you have to taste yourself. Because other things, rocks, grass, trees, don't have the faculty of knowing. Do dogs have the faculty of knowing? What do you think? Do dogs have the faculty of knowing? Why? Because they have mind, yeah. They're sentient beings. The sense of sentient being is having mind. So mind, again, having these two factors of its nature being clear and its function to know. But to explain to someone what knowing is, well, you wouldn't have to explain to a rock, because a rock would know what you're saying, right? But if someone says, what is this knowing? They haven't encountered that. It's something you have to experience yourself. It's the faculty of being aware or cognizing something, understanding something. So I've never heard of any analogy for that. And generally it's said that you can make analogy for the clarity, various examples, like a crystal or a mirror, or the lack of obstructing contact, or the lack of viscosity, so to speak, like the fly being caught in honey or molasses. But the experience of knowing is something you have to taste yourself. Like, say for instance, if I wanted to tell you, or if you wanted to tell me, because I think I've tasted durian once. I think where was it? Maybe it was in Kuala Lumpur. Someone twisted my arm. And if you were to try to tell me the difference between the taste of durian and chocolate, could you describe that to me? You could? Would I be able to then experience that taste of durian through your explanation wouldn't allow me to actually experience that taste. It's something I have to taste myself. You might be able to describe it. So you can describe the knowing, the taste of consciousness, but it has to be self-recognized. You have to experience a taste. You have to look and, right now, your eye consciousness is knowing the perceptual field. Your ear consciousness is knowing the auditory field. Nose consciousness. Can you smell anything right now? I put some tea tree oil on my eyes because the doctor said there were some little mites on my hair follicles. I can smell that because it's in close proximity. So the way that is known, the way that is experienced is by knowing it. You have a taste? Can you experience a taste right now? If you focus on your tongue, you might notice this is maybe a little bit acidic or a little bit neutral or salty, or maybe there's some flavor or some gum you were chewing or nuts you were crunching on. That experience is knowing that. And your body is being perceived right now. Can you kind of feel your body, the outline of your body? There might be some pains, might be comfortable. That is experienced by knowing. Okay, that's all I can think of. Okay. So yeah, good.
Is there a difference between experiencing, knowing, awareness, and cognition? Do they mean the same thing?
Generally, knowing, being aware of, cognizing are synonyms. Experiences of different kinds, you can say, I have experience as a car mechanic. So the experience is not exactly, you could say that the mind is experiencing the object, but it's not necessarily a synonym of knowing, because experiences are of other kinds. You can say, I'm an experienced typist. You want to hire me because I have a lot of experience in the office. Yeah.
It's like the experience of eating durian, then knowing you're eating durian and cognizing that you're eating durian and awareness that you're eating durian.
Yeah.
So do they mean the same thing? The other part is the cognition part is the mind that does it.
So generally the word experience, there's a Tibetan word, nyamlen. So when that comes into the mind, when we talk about the mind and mental factors, usually that's related with a particular cetana, the secondary mind called feeling. And in our course on, I think Saturday, is it Saturday? When we're talking about the four close placements? Close placement of mindfulness on the body, on the feelings, on the consciousness, and on the phenomena. So there's a differentiation. Feeling is a say if we consider consciousness to be some entity, feeling is not something different than consciousness. It's a particular aspect. It was called a mental factor of that's never separated from the consciousness, but is experiencing pleasure, pain, or indifference, or neutral feeling. So the word experience comes up when we talk about feeling. So it is an attribute of consciousness, but it's not an attribute of primary consciousness. Primary consciousness is that which just knows the bare perceptual field. These mental factors like feeling, discrimination, other kinds of, positive minds like love and compassion and patience and so forth, negative states of mind like anger and so forth. Of those, the mental factor of feeling has as its main function to experience pleasure, pain, and indifference. So when I was using the word experience before, you experience an object, I was using it in a loose way. But generally, when we talk about experience, that's the domain of the mental factor feeling. Okay, does that help? Yeah, a good question, good thinking. Oh, anything? Okay, maybe you've been some thoughts that come up. Anyone else have a question while we're just beginning? Okay, I'm going to open my Kindle reader here. Did anyone else download the text since last time? Oh yeah, okay. Another question? Yeah, sure. Why not?
Okay, for example, if you eat a durian, you taste it and your taste consciousness is activated, and then after that your mental consciousness is activated. These are actually two separate consciousnesses, or one. And when
wait, say again?
For example, when you taste something.
Yeah, no, I got that, but they said this activates two...
Yeah, I mean, there is a taste consciousness, right? Related to taste sense power,
right,
which experience the durian. Then after that, there's mental consciousness, conceptual consciousness that comes in. So...
Oh, well, there even be a moment of bare mental consciousness that knows that taste, right? At the end of a train of taste consciousness, before you're able to conceptualize about it, this is a very, very infinitesimal short train of bare perception of taste consciousness. Then the last instant is perceived by the mental consciousness, but is inattentive. That was an example of inattentive cognition. It appears just one instant, so the mental consciousness can't remember that direct experience of the taste, but it can conceptualize about it. But I just wanted to mention, when you say, it almost sounds like there's no mental consciousness until it begins to think about that. There's mental consciousness all the time while we're awake, right? The gross mental consciousness is there all the time. Even when if someone were to say, what are you doing? Oh, I wasn't doing anything, I was just sitting here, not thinking about anything. Your mental consciousness has an object at those times. But, it may be that at some point on that continuum of mental consciousness, because of the taste that you pay attention to, the mental consciousness pays attention to that and then begins to have some thoughts about that. Oh, this is great, or this is terrible, or whatever whatever your reaction to the durian is.
So are these two separate consciousness, the mental consciousness and the taste consciousness? And do they have separate, like all the mental factors, feelings, etc.?
Yeah, they have their own say the primary consciousness of I, or let's say tongue, we're using the Jurian example, has its own subsidiary mental factors, feeling, recognition, or discrimination, so forth. It has what are called, and we'll talk in that starting next week at this time, four lessons we'll be talking about the mind and mental factors in more detail. It has what are called the 5 omnipresent mental factors. Each of the senses have their own, so there is a feeling in the taste consciousness. There is an experience in gustatory, is that the right word? Gustatory consciousness, which experiences the taste. A feeling that experiences pleasure, something which is unpleasant, and that which is neutral. There are other ways that this tongue consciousness knows. It discriminates flavors: sweet, sour, bitter, astringent, hot, salty. Those are the general ones that are used. 6, right? And then there's subcategories of those. Those are not called feelings, those are discriminations that the tongue consciousness has. But then the mental consciousness is aware of that. The tongue consciousness doesn't think, oh, this is sweet. It's just experiencing or discriminating sweetness as opposed to sour or other things. But then the mental consciousness, knowing that, like the fellow in the basement or the gal in the basement that's looking at all of the surveillance cameras on the building, in a sense, the surveillance cameras are they're dumb. They're not making decisions. They're just putting that input down into the surveillance monitor, right? It's kind of the mental consciousness is aware of these. That's not to say that the sense consciousnesses don't know their objects. So the sense consciousnesses are not exactly like this analogy of being cameras. They do know their object, but they don't know it in the sense of conceptualizing about it. So that kind of investigation will, if you try to observe that, how is the eye knowing the field without involving the mental consciousness? We always have mental consciousness, and if your sense consciousnesses are functioning, your mental consciousness will also be knowing that, so it's kind of hard to separate the two. But they have their own feelings. You can have, for instance, there's a good example. You can have an unpleasant feeling on the tongue consciousness, but your mental consciousness can have a happy feeling. Like, for me, that would be watching you eating durian. That's what I was thinking. Say, for instance, if you are having your tooth repaired, and there's a cavity, and it might be very painful what the doctor's doing, or piercing a boil. Another example, it might be you yourself might be doing it, and you are happy to do that. Your mind is happy, even though it's very painful, because you know that this is going to relieve the pain. Does it make sense? So you can have different feelings in the sense consciousness and the mental consciousness. The sense consciousness might be experiencing some pain, and the mental consciousness might be experiencing some, oh, wow, good, phew, relief, getting rid of this. But you're still feeling pain there. You can have the opposite. You can, for instance, naughtily, eat something that you're not supposed to eat. And your tongue, you're eating the chocolate, but your mind is feeling guilt, bad. Oh no, what am I doing? My diet's off or you sensually, you embrace someone suddenly. and your mind is feeling extreme, what am I doing? You may still, your sense consciousness may be experiencing some blissful experience, but your mind can feel negative, be unhappy about that. So they are distinct things. Each of the consciousnesses, from the point of view, if we try to bring in some connection with the, in a sense, Tantra or scientific Buddhism, each of the consciousnesses have their own chi, their own wind, their own prana, that from the time of waking, that prana may have, when you went to sleep, the prana comes back from the senses toward the heart chakra. May not go all the way there. Maybe sometimes in very deep sleep, all of the winds absorb there, or partially to the heart chakra. They're sort of oscillating. And then when you wake up, they're coming to their individual organs. So each of those consciousnesses are somewhat distinct from one another, and they have their own experience of feeling, their own discrimination of their sense field. The ear consciousness can hear can discriminate certain kinds of sounds and so forth, and it has feelings. Remember, we said some of them are more difficult to discern. When you say you have a pleasant visual consciousness, pleasant feeling of the visual consciousness, can you experience that? Maybe it's not just looking at a pretty person, handsome man or pretty woman. That discrimination is being made by the mental consciousness. Oh, you see that. Or a work of art. Some people looking at that work of art would not find it pleasant. They just, or a fly. Experiencing that is not good. It's more of an intellectual thing. So pleasant feeling and sight, you have to investigate what that is. Ear consciousness also, it's not simply hearing some sweet words like, whoa, you're so smart. Wow, you're really handsome or whatever, hearing some sweet words. That's being apprehended by the mental consciousness with happy mental feeling, because usually we use the word happiness to refer to mental bliss, unhappiness, mental uncomfortable, And the senses, we just call them pleasure or pain, neutral. Make sense? So the other ones are more obvious. As you get down to the nose consciousness, you can say that something it almost seems like you would say it's pleasant or unpleasant. Tongue consciousness, tactile consciousness is quite obvious. But for me, the sight and hearing, a little more subtle what those are. Example of the hearing I mentioned before might be an unpleasant sound, would be like scratching your fingernails on a blackboard. Is that what you call that here? The slate board you write with chalk? Some kind of discordant sound that experienced by the ear consciousness. But it's something you can investigate.
Back to my durian question.
Okay, durian tonight.
The second part of the question.
We're going to have to have a durian while I'm here this weekend, yeah.
The second part of the question is, the discrimination of a durian, that meaning the generic image of the durian, appears to the mental consciousness only, right?
So, say again?
When you finally discriminate that it is a durian, after you taste it, that generic image appears only to the mental consciousness, not to the sense consciousness, right?
Right. A generic image is something that is apprehended. It appears to a conceptual consciousness. The sense consciousnesses do not involve themselves in any conceptual, another way to say intellectual work. They're not thinking, you can't, you can't, The eye consciousness, ear consciousness, the other senses do have wisdom. That's one of the, when they know an object. Say, for instance, there are 5 omnipresent mental factors that are present in all of the consciousnesses, sense consciousness and mental consciousness. There are another 5 that could be translated, in the past we've always translated as object ascertaining mental factors. So they are always present when a consciousness is not just functioning, but is knowing an object. Like say, because eye consciousness can know yellow, can know shapes, that's the field of eye consciousness, shape and color. But when you know that, there is a wisdom that's present. There's also a factor of concentration, samadhi, that's present in the eye consciousness. There are 5 other factors that are there. But those factors do not involve, that kind of wisdom that's knowing the object doesn't think about it when we think, oh, you're wise, or that person is wise, or I have wisdom, or I'd like to have wisdom. That kind of wisdom that we're talking about is in the mental consciousness. First intellectual with a generic image, and we can train to develop that wisdom. The bare mental perception can have a direct realization of emptiness, for instance. So we can have like the sense consciousnesses, we can have a bare perception of impermanence and emptiness and other things with a mental consciousness. We can know directly another person's mind with a mental consciousness. But the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and tactile senses, the wisdom within their domain is not intellectualizing, there's no mental image of the durian appearing to the tongue consciousness or the other sense consciousnesses. This term mental image or meaning generality, in Tibetan we say dun chi. Dun means meaning, chi means generality. That mental image or meaning generality is only something which is the appearing object of conceptual mind, and there's no conceptual mind in the senses. Okay? Anyway, we'll go over that when we talk. Chin has a question. Okay, good.
Venerable, is the mental image permanent or impermanent?
Is the mental image permanent or impermanent? So, this again, we'll spend more time in the next 4 classes when we talk about mind and mental. But just briefly, although it seems counterintuitive in the philosophical teachings, it says, generally it says in Sautrantika system, the mental image is permanent. What that means is, it's a little bit interesting, a little bit complicated. Also, it's as though bare perception knows things in their totality. When bare perception sees something, it knows it can. All of the qualities of that thing appear to it. Whereas mental perception, a mental consciousness rather, when we know things conceptually, the mind is only knowing a certain subset of the things about something. It's knowing the thing by eliminating. It's called an eliminative knower, eliminating other things. Whereas the sense consciousnesses are, I think they're called I can't remember the exact technical term. Engaging consciousnesses. They engage all of the qualities. So the way that we're knowing something that we said before is by means of something that's appearing to the mind, which is not the actual thing, which we can call a mental image or meaning generality, which you're asking about. Is that permanent or impermanent? It's as though we're knowing the actual, this box of Ricola Swiss herb lozenges. We're knowing that by means of a mental image of it, if we're thinking about it. It can be said that this box, if I'm thinking about this box actually appears also. The mental image appears, and even the box appears. But the box may be somewhere else. It may be in the United States. It may be in my suitcase. It's certainly not in my mind. But it's still said in some sense to be appearing to the mental consciousness. But the main thing that appears, the main appearing object, is the generic image. And that is something which doesn't have the same qualities of actually perceiving this, where you know all of the qualities of the thing. Say if you look at it, or if you hear it, or you taste it, the contents of it. The generic image knows, is kind of, in a sense, you could say the opposite of non-box. Or let's say the classic example is cow. If you have a mental image of a cow, can you think of a cow right now? Is there anyone who can't think of a cow? Some city boy or girl who's never seen a cow? You've all seen a cow. So if you have a mental image of a cow, it's said that the mental image of the cow is like the opposite of non-cow. So what does that mean? So take cow. What is a non-cow? Is this a non-cow? Yeah. The box, are my glasses a non-cow? Yeah. Am I a non-cow? Hopefully. I might actually be a very talkative cow. A non-cow is, if you think of set theory, mathematics, if you have, so cow is right here in the middle. Non-cow is everything else, like a Venn diagram, everything else other than the cow. Non-cow. What's the opposite of that? Say we've identified non-cow. Non-cow is everything other than the cow, right? What's the opposite of that? Go back. It's the cow. But you're identifying the cow through this intellectual process. It's not as though the mind thinks of this. It's said that our mental image is like that, the opposite of a non-cow. So in that sense, for the Sautrantikas, it's said that the mental image is a metaphysical entity, like in the Sautrantika system when we talk about those things that are only known by conception are called metaphysical entities that are permanent, that don't change moment by moment. They're called conventional truths. They're not the real thing, even though in the higher philosophical systems, the terminology is exactly reversed. Well, not for everything like that, but it says in some of the higher tenets, in the Prasangika, I think that sometimes the mental image might be considered something. Like say, if you have a mental image of a cow walking, can you imagine the cow walking? Or looking at you in the face and chewing? Yeah, you can think of that. So the doubt comes, how can it be permanent if that mental image seems to be moving and looking at me in the eye, mooing and so forth and so on. So anyway, we'll discuss that again later. So let me just finish up before I'll give some question time at the end again. But with the subjects, with the last subject. So I think we talked about bare perceptions, right? Oh, that's interesting in this text, yeah. Did we talk about, so what were the ways of knowing? What was the order that was given in the text? Do you remember? What was the first one? Remind you, presumption, right? Then, was it? Inattentive perception. What was it? What was it? Was it? You have to speak up. Self-sequential, what was it? Oh, subsequent. Sorry. Presumption, inattentive presumption, subsequent cognition, distorted cognition or wrong consciousness, doubt, indecisive wavering, doubt, bare perception, sixth. So in the text, if you have the text, or if you will get it, bare perception is what page is that? Page 21, I guess, right? Yeah, 21, I guess. But and then it goes on to talking about seemingly bare perception, and then it goes to the number of valid ways of knowing. It doesn't have a particular enumeration until after that section of inferential understanding, inferential cognition. So the seventh way of knowing is inferential cognition. So these 7 ways of knowing are there some ways of knowing that are not included in these 7? One of the divisions right before this was called seemingly or seeming bare perception. We talked about bare perception last time, right? Did we not? So we talked about, so far, bare perception was like the 6th one. So seeming or facsimile. Do you know what a facsimile is? You know the fax machine? F-A-X, but that's kind of like shortened. Facsimile doesn't have an X in it, right? F-A-C. How's it spelled? F-A-C-S-I-M, something, right? Facsimile. So a facsimile means something which appears to be something else. Like you send a fax. You know what a fax is? You receive a fax, and it looks like the document that the person sent from the other side of Singapore or from someplace else. Facsimile means something which seems to be something else. It's a copy, kind of. So in the section called facsimiles of bare perception, of direct perception, it does talk about conceptual mind in general. There are many kinds of conceptual minds. So we know things with our conceptual mind. Were general conceptual thoughts any of the 7 ways of knowing? Just say thinking of a cow or thinking of durian. Is it, what was the first one? Is it presumption? No, just thinking of a durian. Is it inattentive perception? No, not necessarily. You can be attentive to it. What was the third one? Subsequent cognition. There can be subsequent moments of your thinking of the durian. Oh, maybe there. There may be a subsequent cognition. There may be the whole thought of the durian may have been influenced by tasting it, and then that there was a mental direct perception for an instant of the durian taste, let's say, and then the mental image of durian rose to the mind, and you were thinking about the durian that had been induced by that experience, by your tasting it or by remembering it. So there are many kinds of intellectual activities that you have to search to see if they fit in any of these 7 categories. These 7 categories may not cover every single act of knowing, experiencing, and so forth. So, but the 7th way of knowing here is an intellectual activity which is valid, which is a valid way of knowing. It's called an inferential cognition or inferential understanding. And I'm not sure what page. It's starting on 39 if you have the text. So inferential understanding or inferential cognition is the comprehension of a obscure fact, or you could say a hidden phenomena, through reliance on a correct line of reasoning, some logic as its basis. When divided, inferential cognitions there are 3 types that are based on the force of evidence, based on renown, and based on belief or conviction. So what this means is this. Inferential cognition is a mental consciousness which is conceptual. It's not a bare perception. And it's something which can know its object. It can realize its object in a particular way. Well, let's say just thinking about durian can know its object. It doesn't have to be an inferential cognition, right? You can know. Can you say that you know? Either remember durian, you're thinking about durian, your experience of it, or you experience it anew and you're thinking about it. That would not necessarily be an inferential cognition. What would be an inferential cognition? Would be something when you can validly know something which is a hidden phenomena. Or I say a hidden phenomenon. I have to say singular, right? Phenomenon. Or you know hidden phenomena in general. Remember, there are 3 types of phenomena. Those that are manifest. So manifest phenomena, or obvious phenomena, are phenomena that present themselves to the sense consciousnesses. So they're objects of sight, hearing, smell, taste, or touch. Hidden phenomena are phenomena that can't be, at some point, cannot be known directly at that moment through the senses, but have to be known initially by using a reason, a logical reasoning. It says line of reasoning or some logic. Say, for instance, is fire a manifest phenomena or a hidden phenomena? Hidden phenomena are those things that can't be perceived directly at first, but have to be known by means of logic. Is fire an obvious phenomena, manifest phenomena, or is it a hidden phenomena? Yeah, Cici, you're going to say, or KK, you're both saying. Manifest phenomena. Should be, right? You can see fire. But say, for instance, in the particular context of you're looking at a valley and there's a stone hut with the windows are not facing you, so you can't see what's in the hut. but you see smoke billowing out from the sides or from the roof. You can't see into it. So at that moment, for your eye consciousness, fire is a hidden phenomena. Although in general, fire is a manifest phenomena. But you can infer, you can use an inferential cognition, knowing that billowing smoke is a sign, is an indication of fire. Remember we talked about this last time, cause and effect. It's an effect of fire. So you can work back from effects to unambiguously say there must be the cause there. Of course, you can argue maybe that's not smoke, maybe that's dust, maybe the ABC, cleaners are cleaning it out that house, and the vacuums are on, and they're throwing out the dust or something like that. But this is assuming that this is smoke. You either smell it or you can see it billowing. It has the qualities of smoke and so forth. Where there's smoke, there's fire. We have that expression, right? And we talked about last time, you can't always say where there's fire, there's smoke. There are some examples, like the hot element of a space heater is an example of the fire element, but it unless something falls on it, it won't produce smoke. You can't always go from an effect to say there will necessarily be the you can't always go from a cause to say there will be the effect. A seed won't always bring its sprout and its eventual thing. It might be destroyed. It might rot. It might be picked up by a crow or something like that. In the same way, the karmic seeds in our mind to experience pleasure or pain and so forth, they can be destroyed. The positive ones can be destroyed by anger, wrong view, other things, abandoning the Dharma. The negative ones can be destroyed by what? How can the seeds of negative karma, how can they be destroyed? Weakened and eliminated, destroyed. Do you know? Wisdom that realizes emptiness maybe, but also the main cause is regret. Feeling strong contrition or regret that you created that action. And then you can, this can weaken those seeds so much that they become impotent, like having put the potent seeds in the oven for 300 degrees for a couple of hours. They may come out looking almost the same, but if you plant them, maybe nothing comes up, or little weak little seedling would come up. So you can infer the existence of fire by the existence of smoke, by seeing the smoke, even though fire in general is a manifest phenomena. In that particular situation, it is hidden. Well, how about this? Subtle impermanence. Can you perceive subtle impermanence now? Is it a manifest phenomena for us? Why not? Don't we see things changing? If I drop the cup on the ground, I don't have a cup today. I thought I was just really thinking I wanted to have a sip of water. There's no cup. If I drop the mug on the ground, it breaks. Isn't that example of seeing impermanence? Yeah, impermanence, but what kind of impermanence? Gross impermanence, right? Not subtle impermanence. We don't see it changing instant by instant. No, sit down. I don't. He was going to give me some water. He's very thoughtful. So subtle impermanence is a hidden phenomena, but it can be known by the mental consciousness by using inferential cognition, by using inference, by using logic. And the mind then that knows that, the first instant of the mind, on the basis of a logical reason, the first instant that knows that is called inferential cognition. The next moment after that is no longer called inferential cognition, because it's not developed on the basis of a logical reason, it's called what? Subsequent cognition. An example, there are many kinds of subsequent cognitions, remember? Second instant of the first instant of seeing, which is supposedly valid because it's fresh, is called a subsequent cognition. It's called subsequent because it's no longer considered valid. It still realizes its object, when we talk about sight and so forth, but it's not fresh like the engine of the train. So the first instant of inferential cognition is a valid way. It realizes its object and is also valid. It has this quality of being fresh. It has been induced by a logical reason. The next instant is kind of pulled along by that, is no longer an inferential cognition. Maybe that when you're first thinking about this, you may have a little insight into inferential cognition. You may have an inferential cognition, several moments of subsequent cognition, but then it becomes unclear. You have to use the logic again to induce another inferential cognition of the same object. Now you're beginning to remember it. Then you can bring back a remembering consciousness of that understanding later. So the the instant after an inferential cognizer is no longer called an inferential cognizer. The second instant of a bare visual consciousness is still called a bare visual consciousness. There's a little bit disparity here. It's still a bare visual consciousness, but it's not a valid visual consciousness. The second instant, it's an inferential. It's a subsequent cognition. So when you talk about the inferential cognition, the second moment is not called an inferential cognition, but it is still a conceptual consciousness. There's a continuity of conceptual consciousness. The second instant is a subsequent cognition. So I'll paraphrase this because it uses words that we're not using. To know something obscure or hidden and not readily obvious, not manifest, you must rely on the valid support of either logical evidence, renown, or conviction. So these are the three divisions of inferential cognitions. Inferential cognition based on the force of evidence, that's like this, having seen something, seen smoke as a sign that you can infer the existence of fire. What are some other examples of that? There are some that, like for instance, on a lake at night, billowing smoke does not exist. How could you say billowing smoke does not exist in a lake at night? Because it's dark, right? You can't see smoke in the dark generally. So this is talking about something like that. This is called a sign of non-observation. On a lake at night, billowing smoke does not exist because fire is not observed. Let's say, assuming that you don't see fire, the implication is on a lake at night, if there was some fire, they say like some floating debris that was on fire or some gasoline, sometimes when oil and some slick gets on the ocean, sometimes it can be ignited. So you would, if you saw that, if there was fire on the lake at night, you would see it because it's dark and the fire is producing light, right? So if there's no light being perceived, if there's no fire being perceived on the lake, you can presume that there is no smoke, right? Why is that? If there's no cause, if there is a cause, you can't surmise that there is an effect, right? You can't go that way. But if there's not a cause, if there's no fire, can you surmise that there's no smoke? Yeah. You have to think about this. The subject that goes into these kinds of logical, all the various kinds of logical reasons is a subject in Tibetan. It's called takrik. Tak means signs. Rik, the way that rik is spelled, like here, low rik has a different meaning, but that rik means reasoning, signs and reasoning. Have you studied is that part of the curriculum of none of the basic program or anything? On the low rik, yeah, study low rik. So in this study in the monastic colleges, they study also Tagrik. So to know something obscure or hidden, and that can mean either, well, let's say for instance, subtle impermanence. Remember, for us that's hidden right now. We need to use a logical reasoning. How about selflessness? Is that a hidden phenomena? For us, that's a hidden phenomena. It's not called deeply hidden. That's the third type of phenomena. Manifest or obvious, that present itself directly to your senses. Hidden phenomena that can be known for the first time only by using logic. And the example again, even though fire is a manifest phenomena, in that particular situation when it's within the walls of a house, you can't see the fire. You can know its presence at that point only by using a logical reason. If you go down to the house, or if you have the drone flies over, Peter was showing me a drone montage of Kopan. Well, you were there, yeah, right? You guys were there, right? Very interesting. You should ask CC and KK if you can get the link to that. I think it's on YouTube or something. But incredible. Kopan is so different than when the last time I was there. So to a Buddha, to us, subtle impermanence is a hidden phenomena. How about to a Buddha? To a Buddha, it's not. It's a little bit like, to the Buddha, the subtle impermanence is not a hidden phenomena because he already realizes that he knows all phenomena with bare perception directly. So he doesn't have to rely on reasoning for anything, for emptiness or for deeply hidden phenomena. In fact, deeply hidden phenomena are said to be phenomena that can only be known directly by the Buddha, by the omniscient mind, but it can be known by relying on the Buddha's explanation to us, explaining how, that the particular action you just created right now will result in you becoming a pratika Buddha, in so many eons in the future in this world system, where you will be called blah, 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 blah. Probably not called blah, 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 blah. You'll have something nicer name, but I was just saying, this is a way of talking. So, for instance, when your neighbor is making I'll just read this. This is not a very good example. For existence, when your neighbor is making a great deal of noise, you may become annoyed and impatient because it is not obvious that sound is impermanent. Okay. However, if you rely on the force of evidence, you can prove to yourself that this noise will pass simply because it is man-made. It is a product of causes. So, if there's something is annoying you, there's a very famous thing, this too will pass. Have you ever heard that expression I mentioned, I think in one of the other classes? This too will pass. Because, whatever your experience is, if you recognize it is the product of causes and conditions, whatever unfortunate situation you might find yourself in, great sadness or distress or pain or being unfairly treated or abused or so, just to remember, this is the product of causes and conditions. My karma, meeting some cooperative conditions, but this will pass. And in knowing that, that can help to prevent anger, impatience, depression from arising. It's kind of by using that kind of inference, it's kind of a temporal antidote to that. You can prove to yourself that noise will pass simply because it is man-made. To do so, you must rely on three factors. Remember the property of the subject, that let's say, sound is impermanent. This sound that I'm hearing, the neighbor mowing the lawn while I'm trying to study for my low-rig exam or something like that. Oh, go away. Chopping wood, just when there's silence and then all of a sudden there's a... Sometimes that's even more annoying than continuous. You can kind of get used to the continuous, but just the sudden one that comes. So when you have a logical reason or in order to develop an inferential cognition by the power of evidence or something that is observed, you have to have what's called a property of the subject. That means the subject sound, or this sound, is impermanent because it's a product. The sound has to be a product. And there has to be what's called the forward pervasion. That means whatever is impermanent is pervaded by being a product of causes and conditions. Also, in the logical system, there was a third factor that has to be present. It's called the reverse pervasion. But the reverse pervasion will always be there if there's a forward pervasion. But if you can't prove the forward pervasion, you might be able to prove the reverse pervasion. We could talk about that at another time. So if you rely on the force of evidence, you can prove to yourself that this noise will pass simply because it is man-made. To do so, you must rely on three factors of agreement. That's a property of the subject. Congruence means the forward pervasion, and incongruence, that means the reverse pervasion. This noise was made by a man. It would be a man, right? This would be a joke in America right now, but it may not resonate with you so much. There's woman power right now. There's a Me Too moment. It would be a man. This annoying noise. This noise was made by a man. Everything man-made must pass, and therefore, and nothing man-made has endured forever. That's the reverse pervasion. Therefore, through this first type of inferential understanding, you can be certain that noise will also pass. With such valid knowledge, you can control your anger. That's an interesting connection there. Okay. So then there's another kind of inferential cognition that's called inferential cognition of inference by renown. Do you know what the word renown means? Something is by common acceptance. Things are called certain things. He is renowned as the king of rock and roll, or he is renowned as something or other. So here the text says, just as Westerners have traditionally seen, quote, a man in the moon. Do you use that expression here? Do you see a man in the moon in Singapore? It's interesting if you ever investigate this expression, because in India, the expression is to see a rabbit in the moon. You have any idea why? How come they didn't see a man? Actually, this is slightly different. Being at different latitudes, looking at the moon from a slightly different orientation, the main, the various discoloration on the moon appears a little bit differently. Is there something in Chinese lore? What do you supposedly see in the moon, according to Chinese? A rabbit or something else, or man? What? What? Lady and a rabbit too. Oh, okay. So there, it's not a man; it's a lady and a rabbit. So a little bit like halfway between India and northern latitudes. It might make some sense. So when looking, just as Westerners have traditionally seen a man in the moon when looking at its craters, Indians have seen a rabbit in the moon. In fact, in Tibetan, when they translate the Sanskrit, they say one of the poetical names in poetical. Is that the right term? In poetry, one of the names for the moon is the bearer of the rabbit. In Tibetan, say Ribon Chen, that which has a rabbit. So it's just known by renown. You can infer, if someone says the bearer of the rabbit, you can infer that they are referring to. You can infer they are referring to the moon. Okay. When in Sanskrit and Tibetan literature you read about that which has a rabbit, these words do not refer to their obvious literal meaning. When, in poetry or, in common speech, if you're talking about the possessor of the rabbit, you're not talking about a rabbit hunter or a rabbit tamer or something like that. Remember we were talking about the disciple of the Buddha, Ashvajit, who was the one who met, Shariputra met Ashvajit, who was, before Shariputra met the Buddha, Ashvajit was one of the first 5 disciples. And he's the one who said this, supposedly he said this, Ye dharma hetu prabhava hetu tasham, to Shariputra, this verse that became enshrined as a if you put an om at the beginning and a svaha at the end, it's called the mantra of dependent origination. So Ashvajit, Ashva, you know what Ashva means in Sanskrit? Horse. Like when we offer the horse and the mandalas, and so forth, the precious horse. Ashvaratna, something like that. Ashva. So Ashvajit means horse trainer or tamer of horses. Maybe in modern terminology it would be called a horse whisperer. Ashvajit was, have you heard that? There was some book some years ago called Horse Whisperer, someone who was able to come talk to the horse, calm it down, and sort of train it and so forth. So when we talk about, that's just a name for him. So, but if we talk about that which possessed a rabbit, we're referring to the moon. You know that such literary allusion refers to the moon through an inferential understanding based on renown or popular convention. Renown means popular convention. What is, like the, what's an example of some popular renown? Like if you know who it's referring to. Who is the king of rock and roll? Who? Elvis, yeah, that's what I would say. You and I say, someone else might say someone else, but rock and roll, that's limited. People nowadays, they don't listen to rock and roll. What did they call Muhammad Ali? Was there some epithet, something, convention, worldly convention that he was renowned at? I thought he was the greatest, the greatest boxer or something like that. So you know that such literary allusion refers to the moon through inferential understanding based on renown or popular convention. In Western literature, you know that man's best friend. You know, who's a man's best friend? Is it his wife, his sister, a dog, right? So, yeah, I think during World War II, when the American flyers were flying and fighting the Japanese, often there would be, it was unsure, you know what I'm going to say? That it was unsure when you're listening on your radio whether the person you were talking to was another Japanese pilot speaking English, pretending to be an American or British pilot. So you would use different kinds of expressions like this, you know, to test them out, because they would learn the language, but they wouldn't necessarily know all of these things that were known by popular convention in your country, right? So in Western literature, you know that a man's best friend is his dog through a similar valid means. This is also the method by which you know what any word means when you first hear it, for all words are popular conventions. What does that mean? It has a very profound meaning. You know, this is not a clock, what do you call it, a portable clock or a mini alarm clock from its own side. It's called that. Someone gave a name, clock, to this at some point, and after that point, other people accepted, okay, we're going to call that thing a clock. And if a little child says, what's that? Some of you are parents, you must have heard that, right? Do you have kids, this lady? Did you have children? No? You did? Yeah, you. She has, yeah. So did your children, when they were growing up, do you remember when they were little, did they ask questions like that? Oh, you're, okay. She's nodding off. So, but this is a very common thing, isn't it? Like children ask, oh, Daddy, what is that? So the child sees something and knows it does something or appears a certain way, that they don't know the popular convention for it. As soon as Daddy or Mommy says, or big brother or big sister says, it's a clock, or it's a car, or it's an elephant or giraffe or something, then they associate that word with the object. The words don't adhere in the objects. Seeing something for the first time, you don't necessarily know its name. So that's very powerful to know. Sometimes we may, that can help to overcome some kinds of misconceptions and even delusions. All words are popular conventions. So that's a second division of inferential cognition. You infer by means of this convention that this is the name of that thing. Then the third thing is by means of conviction or faith. Inferential cognition by the power of faith. So this means, this is talking about extremely hidden phenomena. And although this text is making an assumption that for instance, to know that giving, charity, will result in riches in the future, and that by practicing morality, you will have high rebirth. These are the classic examples, of the 6 perfections. Those are the first 2, right? Practicing generosity, the karmic result of that is to experience resources, a vast amount of resources in the future. And practicing ethics, restraining from negative actions, is the main cause of being born as a human and so forth, higher rebirth. Is that the only cause? Pure morality? What are the other causes of human rebirth? Is that sufficient? Prayer, yeah. They say when we talk about the life of leisure and endowment, perfect human rebirth, the causes are generally ethics, morality, stainless prayer, and what's the other thing? For perfect human rebirth, not just human rebirth. Generally, they say sometimes generosity, but actually it includes all 6 perfections. In other words, having collected other kinds of factors that make your human life, which is mainly caused by ethics and ripened by prayer, then it fills in the other things to make it a perfect human rebirth. So that you have resources, you don't have to beg, you have all your senses, you're born at a time when the Buddha exists and so forth and so on. Or when the teachings exist, when they have not degenerated. So anyway, this text, we'll see in the next page, it seems to say that simply knowing those things are deeply hidden phenomena. But generally, when the Lamas explain, they say those are not deeply hidden, they are hidden phenomena. To know that giving results in having resources, that practicing ethics results in having higher rebirth. But they're not deeply hidden. They can be known through logic. But what is deeply hidden are the particularities of them. That one particular act of giving will result in a particular experience in the future at a particular time, at a particular location. Where the Buddha made prophecies about, because you did this, this will happen, so forth and so on. Anyway, I'll read this, what this says. There are certain things that are extremely obscure, in other words, deeply hidden, and only when you become a Buddha can you have bare perception of them. So it's a little bit different. Deeply hidden phenomena, you can only have bare perception of them when you become Buddha. What about hidden phenomena? Can you have bare perception of them before becoming Buddha? Yeah, like you can have direct perception, bare perception of emptiness and permanence. You don't have to become Buddha. But this deeply hidden phenomena, extremely obscure phenomena, are things that can only be perceived by the Buddha. Say, for instance, some of the qualities of the Buddha that he did not explain, that the lower bodhisattvas, by lower I mean 10th level bodhisattvas, anyone other than a Buddha, they can know certain things about the Buddha through observing the emanations of Buddha and through the Buddhist, the general teachings, but certain qualities, super qualities of the Buddha, the bodhisattvas can't know. Only the Buddhas can perceive their own some of these qualities. Before you become a Buddha, you must rely. Open the text. You must rely on your conviction in the Buddha's scriptural texts to know deeply hidden phenomena at all. Or not just the text, but the proclamation. The Buddha told certain people, this poor couple, they had no possessions, but they saw the Buddha coming and they wanted to make offerings, so they gave their one cloth. They had to cover themselves, and he said, because of this, you will, this will result in this particular result, a great result in the future. So it doesn't necessarily only mean texts, but generally now the Buddha is not present. The Nirmanakaya aspect of the Buddha is not present. Is the Buddha present in the world today? Oh, someone's nodding yes in the corner. Yeah. Why? Project. Project your voice. Say with the microphone.
The Nirmanakaya of the Buddha is not present, but the teaching of the Buddha, which is the, I think, Sambhogakaya.
Ah, okay. You could say something like that. The teaching of the Buddha is a is brought about by this Sambhogakaya. Yeah, we say it like that. Of all of the actions of the Buddha, you know, helping sentient beings in various ways, it's said that the most important is the teaching, which is brought about by the Sambhogakaya. So you could say that. But is the Buddha present in the world today? The teaching's present. That's a good argument. But maybe you could say the gurus, in the teachings about guru devotion, it's said that Buddha Vajradhara explained, prophesized that in the future, even if the Buddhas were not apparent in Nirmanakaya form or obvious form, that they would still be present in the gurus. So there's some gurus who are actually, just appearing as guru with faults and so forth, are actually Buddhas. And for us, the training in that is even if the person that our teacher that we're trying to practice with respect to guru devotion, even if they're not actually Buddha, if you view them, if you consider them to be Buddha, if they have the right attributes, if they teach the teachings correctly, if they have say for instance, the 10 attributes of a Mahayana spiritual friend. Have you heard that? The 10 attributes of a spiritual friend? What are the 10? Do you know? Okay. Who knows? The lady behind Cece, do you know? Do you know? With Holland on your shirt? What?
Ethic of discipline.
Again?
The guru must have ethic as discipline.
Discipline?
Yeah. Have concentration.
Concentration.
The wisdom.
Wisdom.
And his knowledge must be higher than the student.
Qualities must be higher than the student.
Compassion.
Have compassion.
Give up discouragement.
Give up discouragement.
How many?
That's 6. It's good.
Do you like emptiness?
Well,
at least emptiness. At least Pasandika view emptiness. At least.
Deep understanding of emptiness, or you said at least or something, huh? Yeah. 7? That's good. So
patient. Patient.
Okay. So here, I'll help. So I'm very, I admire that. It's someone who has memorized some of these things. It's really good. So one good way is that in Maitreya's, one of Maitreya's texts, what is it? Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, I think. One of the 5 texts that Maitreya taught to whom? A Sangha, right? So he mentions this Shenyan Duwa Shiwa Neshiba. So those are the first 3. Duwa means disciplined through the practice of Vinaya, mind pacified through the practice of concentration, higher training of concentration, just as you said. And Newa Shiwa means, peaceful and pacified through the higher training of wisdom. So the example I gave before of Lama Yeshe, when Lama Zopa, when I brought the Tara statue up where the ornaments had fallen off, the wax thing that was in the sun, and Lama Zopa was pretending to be freaked out, oh no, And Lama said, doesn't matter, Sopa. So that kind of complete pacification, through wisdom, understanding emptiness. Then Yondin Lakpa, which means more qualities than the disciple. You should rely on a teacher who has more qualities than you do. Generally, that's the ideal. You may not recognize them as qualities, but Yondin Lakpa Shenen, means a virtuous friend. Dua Shiva Nesheba, Yonden Lakpa Sunje, someone with enthusiasm, that works continuously again and again for sentient beings. Sunje, Yonden Lakpa Sunje. Oh, no, I'm forgetting. Usually I recite every day and I put on the spot, I can't remember. But there are 10 qualities of the Mahayana Guru. So even they may not actually be a Buddha. If they have these 10 qualities, they are a proper person to consider your spiritual friend, and by implication to be understood as a manifestation of the Buddha. Why is it? Well, even if they don't have all 10 in this degenerate age, if they have at least sort of minimum qualities, someone who's aiming for at least leading you into methods to find happiness in future lifetimes. That's very, very important. And they have compassion, and they have some understanding of emptiness. Okay? But so what's the point of that? If you consider them to be Buddha, even if they're not actually Buddha, but they're qualified to give the teachings, the proper teachings, the Buddha Vajradhara said he would enter in to their mind stream and bless you. So if you follow their teachings, they're giving, it's as though you're actually hearing it from the Buddha. Well, right now, if Buddha was actually here teaching us, the words may not be any different. We might be, the aura and the so forth. Our eyes are bugging, and we'd be really enthused. So if you have that same kind of ardor for the spiritual friend, considering them to be the Buddha, you receive very profound blessings. Because they're teaching you directly, you receive very quick blessings. Say, for instance, you might consider Buddha Shakyamuni to be your guru, right? Can you imagine that? And you read the sutras, oh, this guy had it, he knew it. He's my guru. You don't have direct teachings from him right now. There's only through the scriptures, unless you think you communicate with the Buddha. Some people told me that they hear the Buddha answer their prayers or something. I don't know. They might. But if you consider the Buddha your perfect being, omniscient being, your guru, you receive very powerful blessings by following those teachings. So even you don't have a physical guru, you consider Shakyamuni Buddha to be your guru, you receive very powerful blessings. But if you consider the individual now who's teaching you to be a manifestation of the Buddha, who's telling you, don't eat that, wash your hands before, whatever, and teaching you about the Dharma right now that will have immediate relevance to your particular situation right now, you receive very fast blessings, very rapid blessings. So the practice of the Guru devotion has incredible benefits that way. Even if you were to say, that can't be Buddha, you don't know, they might actually be Buddha. But even if they're not Buddha, if you consider them to be the Buddha, you receive the blessings of actually receiving teachings from the Buddha, and you create the karma to meet actual manifestations of the Buddha in future lives. You're going to, like Lama Tsongkhapa, actually to see Manjushri, to receive teachings from the actual real Manjushri, not just someone who you thought was an emanation of Manjushri or something. Okay. Oh, Yonden Lakpa Sunje Lungichuk. Next one, Lungichuk means rich in scriptural understanding. Vast knowledge of the scriptures. Deni Raptu Tokla Makeden, Deni means thusness. Raptutokpa means real, not just good understanding, deep understanding of the reality of phenomena, emptiness. Deni Raptutokla, Makeden, skillful in speaking. Mawa means to speak, to present the teachings. Sewe Dagni Kyoa Panglaten. Sewe Dag means great, of a nature of compassion and love, loving nature. And in fact, I think it's the one that you said, not abandoning discouragement. These are the 10 qualities of the Mahayana Guru. So, based on prophecies of the Buddha, if the Buddha is present, or based on the scriptural teachings of the Buddha, you can know certain deeply hidden phenomena by the power of conviction. But you have to develop that particular. It's not just like, oh, okay, I'm going to believe the Buddha, and someone else says I don't believe the Buddha. You have to develop that conviction over time. It's said that by realizing emptiness, you're following the Buddha's teachings over some time, you have an understanding of emptiness. That particular kind of understanding that is so profound, use earth-shattering consequences for you, to destroy your delusions, to give you confidence that you can change, to overcome all of the regrets about your past behavior, low self-esteem, whatever, to recognize that you can become Buddha. Has such great implications that only the Buddha explained. When you understand that the Buddha taught this hidden phenomena that has such, out of his compassion, you develop incredible faith in the Buddha. That's the faith that's necessary for the faith of a conviction. Then you can understand, you can have an inferential knowledge, a valid realization of deeply hidden phenomena because of that deep faith in the Buddha. Not just superficial faith. I have to believe in the Buddha because I'm a Chinese, or I'm a Buddhist, I have to believe, I have no choice. Not like that, but really conviction that comes about through understanding, say for instance, emptiness and so forth. Okay, the final sentence here, it says, inferential understanding and valid inferential understanding are to be known as mutually inclusive. Mutually inclusive means what? Means if it is one, it is the other. Right? So if it is inferential understanding, it is valid inferential understanding. Who can explain what that means? Pretty simple, but if it's inferential understanding, it has to be valid inferential understanding, or valid cognition. If it's something is valid, what was the special quality? Not only did it realize the object, it had to be new, fresh, right? So only the first instant of a bare perception is a valid bare perception. The succeeding moments are called subsequent cognitions. They realize the object, like the cars of the train being pulled by the first instant. So here, this is just making a point. Only the first instant of a inferential cognition of a cognizer is valid, and only it is an inferential cognizer. The subsequent moments are called subsequent cognition, but they're not called inferential cognizers, because an inferential cognizer has to have been based on a reason that's like the first instant. Okay. So we've covered the 7 ways of knowing. You might say, you can think that to end up with a bare perception of emptiness, you could start from a wrong view, wrong perception, wrong consciousness. What would be the next step in progression? Pardon? Doubting consciousness. So of the 3 kinds of doubting consciousness, which would you have first? Leaning in the right direction? No. You'd have a doubting consciousness leaning in the wrong direction, which is still considered by some to be a distorted consciousness. Then you'd have equally balanced doubt. Then you'd have a doubt leaning in the correct direction. Does that realize its object? If you think emptiness, emptiness probably exists. Is that a realization of emptiness? No, doesn't realize its object. What would come next? Correct belief, correct assumption, presumption. So remember the text said, some people say that realizes its object, but generally we'd say that doesn't realize its object. It's a conceptual mind, but it's not an inferential cognizer. It hasn't realized its object, say emptiness, by means of a proper logical reason. It's built up some confidence. It's not just a doubt thinking it's probably empty. You think, yeah, I've studied emptiness. I read the 7 ways of knowing. I studied Nagarjuna, Geshe Chuni's teachings. But basically what we've heard and we've contemplated still has not resulted in an inferential cognizer. So we have a correct belief, which is very good. And what was it Aryadeva said? Even if you have a doubt leaning in the right direction, do you remember, what this is in the 400 stanzas of the yogic activities of bodhisattvas, famous verse by Aryadeva? Even having a doubt, and implication means leaning in the right direction, about the emptiness of phenomena, shatters the foundations of cyclic existence. This creates the karma in the future to be able to realize emptiness. Say, for instance, there's a big boulder in the road in India. Have you been to India sometimes? Or maybe even here, some places, maybe in Malaysia, some isolated place, a big boulder comes down and you can't get by, the bus can't get by, you're stopped. No way to get further realization, so to speak, That's kind of, the boulder is kind of like wrong view. So even the first day, the guys are going out there with some sledgehammers, just making some cracks in that big boulder. They haven't eliminated it yet. They just put some crack in it. You can be sitting on the bus and thinking, okay, we may get out of this. It's sort of like just having a doubt about the existence of emptiness, that maybe it exists, that can shake the foundations of samsara. So from wrong view to doubt, then to have a correct belief, obviously much more powerful. You assume that emptiness exists, even though you haven't realized it. Then from that correct belief, if you follow the teachings of Nagarjuna, the Buddha, and so forth, and you develop a logical understanding why the self must not exist the way that it appears, at that first moment you develop an inferential cognition. And inferential cognition is necessarily valid, right? That means it has realized its object, and it's realized its object freshly. Second moment of that you want to, because you have to keep on meditating on that, is a subsequent cognition. At the end of it, just when you meditate, you're on the path of preparation with a union of tranquil abiding, calm abiding, and special insight. on your mental image that's becoming thinner and thinner. And the next moment, you're going to have a direct perception. That last moment of the inference is what? An inattentive perception. That's how we sneak in inattentive perception. Because the last moment of any mental continuum or sense continuum is not perceived attentively. It's just one instant. It's like the caboose of the train, you know what I'm saying? And then finally you have a bare perception of emptiness, the seventh way of knowing. So that's one way that these 7 ways of knowing, one way of thinking why they're important, they show a progression, give us some confidence of how we can progress from our wrong view to doubt, which is very good. You know, doubt, as said, as Nagarjuna said, if you have doubt, that's not bad as long as you try to clarify the doubt. And as Aryadeva said, even doubt leaning in the right direction can shake the foundations of samsara. Then if you have a correct belief, later that correct belief is based on logic, and at some point you'll have an inferential cognition. You will actually realize emptiness then. It's not just a belief. Maybe fleeting. You'll want to enhance that with concentration and vipassana, penetrative insight. Is still a conceptual mind, but that conceptual mind can actually transform eventually by familiarizing with it again and again. Right? That's what the bodhisattvas and the hearers and solitary realizers do on the path of preparation, familiarizing it with it again and again. After the last moment of the path of preparation, they enter into the path of seeing and realize emptiness directly. Okay? We're actually 9:32, but someone might have some last question that people will be patient with. Yes?
You have mentioned the 6 consciousness, right?
Yes.
So what's the purpose of the awareness in which the object appears but is not uncertain? Is there any purpose for it?
What do you mean by purpose? Do you mean the Buddha...
Why did he taught this awareness since you are not mentioned?
Yeah, but no, I did say the inattentive perception was the example in this list was the last moment of the inferential cognizer. So it's going to, just after that, it's going to have the direct perception of emptiness. It's going to transform into that. In that meditative session, the bodhisattva sits down, he or she has meditated for a long, long time on the path of preparation. They have an inferential cognition, a realization of emptiness, which is intellectual, conceptual, via a mental image. That mental image, in a sense, the veil is becoming thinner and thinner. And the next moment, because of the force of their collection of merit and their wisdom, it's going to be transformed into direct perception, as though the last veil is taken away, and their mental consciousness will know that directly. The last moment of that inferential cognizer is an inattentive perception. So that's how it's sneaked in. I mean, is it inattentive perception, or what's the word? A perception to which an object appears but is not ascertained. A consciousness to which an object appears but is not ascertained. Okay? So thank you. This is a difficult subject. We used, and we went briefly through also the explanation of this brief text. There are more elaborate explanations of this. If you're inspired, you might wait when Geshe Chuni Gen Rinpoche teaches again this particular subject, or if it's taught by some of the older students. This is what? Low rig, right? Low rig. Low means awareness. Rik actually means knowing, but this particular text sort of changes the spelling of the word to mean the ways of knowing. It's mainly talking. In general, low rik includes this topic, subject matter that we've been talking about, the ways of knowing, and then the subject matter we'll be talking about the next 4 Tuesdays and Thursdays, the mind and mental factors, and how we, the other aspect, the psychological aspect of mind, which is very complementary. So if you have a chance to attend those, that'd be great. Let's dedicate the merit that we've created tonight and in this series and in all your studies, this life, all the merit that you created. You can dedicate your merit again and again, If you think of all the merit you must have created in the past to be born with a perfect human rebirth in Singapore, where the teachings exist, to have contact with Amitabha Buddha Center, to meet great beings. Wow. Incredible karma I've created, and definitely created karma this evening, listening to the teachings with good mind, good motivation, with, asking questions, honing our mind. Due to these merits, may they not simply ripen in some samsaric pleasure in the future that is quickly lost, but in whatever way they ripen, may they become the cause of my continued spiritual advancement, progress. As a result of these merits, may I realize eventually authentic, spontaneous renunciation, the altruistic mind to achieve enlightenment, altruistic in the sense of wanting to do so for the welfare of others. And may I realize, even this lifetime, the correct view of emptiness. May I have it, may I realize that, perhaps inferentially at first, due to the karma that I've created, may I have the fortune to meet, even this lifetime, the teachings of secret mantra, Vajrayana, and to progress through the practices of the Bodhisattva perfections. May I put the teachings into action this lifetime, practicing the perfections of generosity, ethics, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, meditative stabilization, and wisdom. May I, if fortunate to reach the tantric teachings, may I be fortunate to practice the generation and completion stages and even achieve enlightenment quickly. All based on this sense of empathy for others, our sense of equality with them, our sense of indebtedness to them as having been our parents and helpers in so many lifetimes. Due to these merits, may I quickly achieve enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And then seal that dedication. If you know a little bit about emptiness, seal it in what's called the emptiness of the 3 spheres. The merits that I'm imagining dedicating, all the merits that I created today, this course, even in past lives, they don't exist for their own side, findable somewhere. They're just popular conventions, so to speak. They're just merely imputed by the mind. The act of dedication, that is myself thinking to link these karmic seeds with those particular results, that can't be found anywhere. It's just a name given to that whole process. It's empty of existing from its own side. And the goals dedicated to the various realizations, the achievement of enlightenment, although they seem very concrete and irrefutable, they themselves are empty of inherent existence. They only exist by appellation, by imputation, by popular convention, merely imputed by the mind. They're empty of existing from their own side. yet still function. Thank you very much.